WNST, Taos people on and talk about baseball stuff. So as much as I'm going to be following hockey and talking hockey, and we'll get to Al Koken and Ed Frankovic and a bunch of people. We got the Liars Luncheon and the NFL Draft and, of course, the NBA and the Masters. But it's a baseball week, and this guy, I think the last time we talked, we were trying to figure out what the hell Buck Showalter was doing in the 11th inning up at Toronto last year. We don't have to worry about that anymore because they all made up for it, and Trumbo hit a home run on opening day, and everything's good now. We welcome Tim Wendell back on, longtime baseball scribe at USA Baseball Weekly as well as at the USA Today. He is now an author, a professor, writer in residence at Johns Hopkins University. That's my future title, writer in residence. We welcome him back on. You can follow him at Tim_Wendell out on Twitter, and freshly back from the island of Cuba. Correct, Tim?
Very good, Nestor. Great to be with you. Yeah, well, Cuba's happening again. This is my fourth trip since 92, so it's been crazy.
Were you on the Orioles trip back in 99? I was. Okay, so we were in the same – so I was there when you were there. How much has it changed? I mean, I often wonder. I mean, it's on television now all the time, right? Like, there used to be, like, if you got a color picture out of Cuba somewhere, it was always of a car in a decrepit building with a couple of pretty girls in skirts in the front or dudes playing dominoes in the park, right? Those are the pictures of, the old cars, right? Now it's – Tim, I don't think I go a week without seeing some sort of feature or featurette. There's plenty of journalism coming out of Cuba now, right?
Very much so. I mean, it's changing all the time. And this is, like I said, my fourth trip, and each time has been markedly different than the time before. Tourism, Nestor, is through the roof. I was told it's up 25% just in the last 6 months, even though some of the U.S. airlines have scaled back some flights, people pouring in. Airbnb, that's the place to stay because hotel rates are through the roof. And it seems to be opening up the country. I must admit, I got more questions about our new president in Havana than I've had anywhere down here because they want, in a sense, the trade, the tourism to keep going too. And it's going to be an interesting couple years. I would advise anybody thinking of going down, do it soon. Somewhat it's the political climate. Who knows when it's going to get cut off. But also, it's changing quick. The first time say McDonald's goes up on the Mollycon, I think I'll just cry, and that'll be the end of my times going down. But right now, it's still very much a trip back in time. It's a gas.
Well, he is Tim Wendell. He travels the world looking for good stories, and I know you're doing a book on cancer next year. But baseball's like even when you're not writing about it, you sort of come back to it. And I think this is a week here where if you had any association to baseball or the Orioles or anything near and dear, opening day still marks the passage of time, I guess is what I would say. And certainly for you and I, 25 years, I'm sure you were very involved in Camden Yards and the Rick Sutcliffe. I've had Janet Marie on this week and Marty Conway and all the old employees and whatnot. I'll find Larry Lucchino and Charles Steinberg before it's all over with. But 25 years, Tim Wendell, how about that?
Yeah, and it's amazing, the impact that Camden Yards has had. I just did a piece that's out in the new National Geographic Traveler about, in a sense, baseball ballparks, stadiums, etc. And you got to lead off with Camden Yards, and that was a big part of my book, Down to the Last Pitch, where roughly a little bit over 25 years since that World Series, the Twins and the Braves. But I felt I had to do justice, certainly to Janet Marie Smith, who, in my mind, should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, for what the impact she's had upon the game is amazing, and so carved out a section in that book to really go back into the construction, how much people went out on a limb. I still remember Larry Lucchino way back when that was just getting going. They were starting to do construction, and I went up to visit him when I was still at Baseball Weekly, and he said, "Let me show you something." And he went to a filing cabinet, and he pulled out the original blueprints for Camden Yards. The warehouse was gone. It was all parking.
You know what?
And it was,
Jan and Marie talked to me about that because there was also a movement to keep half of the warehouse and not the
yep,
other half. And if you
yep,
remember, I mean, I walked in there for the first time with Stedman. Stedman wanted that stadium in Port Covington. There were people in the State House who wanted that stadium in Columbia or somewhere in the corridor to be shared. And it was really Governor Schaefer that said it's going to be down here and how it was going to go. And, that thing could have gone a million ways, right? Like, that's the weird part is we're all like, oh, Camden Yards, there it is. It was always there. Yeah, and seeing what happened in Oakland and San Diego and St. Louis with football teams now and all the money and the state money not being there and people fighting against it instead of for it, which we didn't have a lot. There wasn't a lot of fighting against Camden Yards in Baltimore, especially once the Mayflowers moved out. It was almost like it needed to be civically decreed that this would happen, but for it to be such a hit, it didn't have to go well, right? It could have been a disaster.
No, there was so many, as you well know, so many pitfalls, certainly in location. It could have gone someplace else. Now everybody's just like, oh, yeah, it's at Inner Harbor. It started the Renaissance. And you're going, yeah, it could have ended up someplace else. So you look at the design, you could have had that whole place just surrounded with surface parking. It could have looked like Royals, Kauffman Stadium out in Kansas City, but plopped down in Inner Harbor. And that's why I give certainly Janet Marie, Latino to a certain extent, too, a lot of credit for sticking to their guns. I think it takes a lot of guts to push back against an HOK or somebody like that, an architect that's now, that has been cranking them out and just like, well, here's your version of our genius. Well, maybe it takes a little bit more to kind of say, no, we'd like some alterations, some major ones. And I think I still love going to Camden, and I'm so happy the Orioles are doing, looking good yesterday. Opening day they looked awesome, and so it's great to be in that setting. I tell you, you talk to ball players. Ball players love to come to Camden Yards. It is one of these ballparks that they come to early. They love to just sit out in the dugout and look around.
It is funny, because to you and me, we have romance with it, but if you're a 22, 3, 4, 5-year-old player and you've been playing in Toledo or Peoria looking for your cup of coffee on the edge of whatever team it is, right? What ballpark do you want to go play in if you're that kid? Camden Yards is right next to Fenway and Wrigley because they all existed before these kids were born, right? I mean, they don't remember it going up or have any of those memories that old farts like you and I have. So that is a fascinating thought that when you're a rookie now, what ballpark do you dream of playing in or want to play in or picture yourself in? And all these kids have played all the EA Sports games that now have the incredibly lifelike video game, simulation. They all picture themselves like that, right? And Camden Yards is an old stadium to all of them. It's not freshly minted in any way, right?
Yeah, and it's great. You get somebody like an assistant coach or a manager. Like I still remember one time sitting around with Mike Socio when the Angels were in town, and we're just sitting around the dugout, and I've forgotten who is, some of his younger players are around, and Socio knows his history, and he just starts going, this is where it began. This is where these ballparks, kind of took off. You got Coors Field, you got, the park in Minneapolis, on and on it goes. It started, and it's here. And it's what's so bizarre, and you well know, Nestor, is we were at a crossroads there because the stadium, and it is certainly a stadium, and I like it to a certain extent, that opened a year before Camden was Sky Dome, now Rogers Center in Toronto. Huge deal, with a moving roof and everything else, retractable dome. And I thought at first it was going to be going more in that direction. Certainly after Seattle kind of did something similar with Safeco, etc.
By the way, I am disappointed that we didn't build a dome here. I mean, I don't dislike our football stadium. I'm not as enamored with Camden Yards as everyone else is. I'm just not. I think it's sterile. I don't think there's been a whole lot of fun there over 25 years. There hasn't been a parade. There's been an owner who's been a jerk, and for 15 years the team wasn't relevant. So there's a lot of that for me. But there's also we didn't get Final Fours, we didn't get Super Bowls. There's a million things economically that would have been movers had we put a roof on one of the stadia here. Just from a taxpayer standpoint, I sit here and watch both of them mostly empty most of the time, and seeing theaters and what they're doing in like Atlanta with the ballpark there, and what LA and Vegas are going to do, but building something around it that's more glue for it when it's not 10 football games a year, 81 baseball games a year. And look, the old man's chased Jimmy Buffett and Van Halen famously out of the Jimmy. None of those concerts have happened at the baseball stadium ever over his dead body. They've chased things out. But I agree, it wouldn't have been as beautiful if it had been Sky Dome, but we would have had a Super Bowl here by now. I mean, that would have been one of the parts was, do you try to lure a football team into a multi-purpose facility, right? It didn't have to be a baseball stadium. There could have been a lot of movement afoot to say, no. We're not going to build a stadium and not be able to get a football team, right? I mean, that was a big part of that too.
Yeah, very much so. It was part of kind of trying to woo a football team back, and I wonder maybe, as you say, they went too specific with a football kind of friendly place, because really that was like the last piece of land there in the Inner Harbor. But I look back, and just from a baseball standpoint, I'm happy the Orioles stood their ground. I'm happy Janet Marie and Larry Latino, et cetera, because we wouldn't have some of these, you can go anywhere now in the country, and, there's things maybe you don't like about it. I mean, Nats Ballpark, it's too much of everything. I wish it was distinctive in its own way, but still, it's a good place to go see a game. And I don't think we would have had that legacy without Camden. And I see what you're saying. Yeah, you miss out on the Super Bowl. You miss out on more concerts if you don't have something that's retractable. I guess the swing and the miss is with the football stadium.
Tim Wendell joining us here. We're talking baseball. We're talking Cuba. We're talking cancer. Talking books. Talking about stuff. How do you feel about the season this year? I mean, for me with the Orioles, people ask over the weekend. I've famously put the number at 78. I hope they exceed it, quite frankly. But I've looked at their pitching. I know how this rolls long term. I think they've been very fortunate in a lot of ways. I mean, they were a very flawed ball club last year and sort of maximized what they could do. And they will not pitch as well this year as they pitched last year. And for that reason, I think the wheels come off. I think they got older players. I think injuries will start to bleed into this. They don't have young players to take places of anybody who's injured. They have zero depth in pitching, really zero depth on the farm positionally, that if they were to lose an Adam Jones or a Hardy or a Machado or any of these guys, Chris Davis, for a long stretch, what would they do? I think it's more of a challenge. I think they've overachieved a number of years in a row. If they win 92 games this year, good on them. I don't know where that's coming, especially with who's going to be handling the ball every night.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know where 92 is coming from this year. I think they're going to do better than 78, simply because I think not so much the expectations, say, within the organization. I think in the clubhouse, they expect to win the close, tight games. The margin for error certainly isn't there as it would be, say, for Cleveland or a Boston, et cetera. But I think they're going to be all right. And the other reason I'm kind of leaning that way a little bit, I don't see them winning the division. I think this division is going to be a little bit more competitive than everybody has said. I think the Red Sox, I'm not quite sold on them. I think the Yankees got a lot of growing up to do. Rays, I don't know. You go back and forth. And from what little I've seen so far, the Blue Jays, they're going to miss Edwin Encarnacion a ton. And I think they don't quite stack up. Their pitching's better, I think. But
well, that's the question. Who got better? I mean, hell, everybody in the offseason said, we're going to get better, we're going to get better. The Orioles aren't better. I mean, they're just not. I mean, maybe in the end it'll look that way, but you'd be selling me some Sean Spicer nonsense if you're going to sit in front of me and tell me this is a better team than the one they had last year. It's certainly not the one they had the year before that.
I agree. I'm not going to play Sean Spicer on you. I'm not going to do that. But I think the one thing that they do have is, and it's funny, you brought it up when we began the conversation, Buck Showalter and his bullpen. I think he's going to use it in a little bit different way and a little bit more productive way. And I think what Terry Francona did with Cleveland last year in the playoffs, I don't think it's going to percolate throughout baseball. Baseball just doesn't pick up on things that quickly, certainly not like the NFL or the NBA. But I think the more savvy folks will pick up on it. And I think Buck's one. I think Madden in Chicago is another. I don't know. Let's see what Farrell does in Boston, et cetera. But I think the ones I think we're going to see from the more forward-thinking clubs deploying their bullpens in a little bit different, and I would argue a more effective way. And I think if that happens, I think they're in. This is going to be, I think, a much more, as I said, much more competitive division than a lot of people think. I think the team that's going to run away and hide in the American League's Cleveland, and everybody else is kind of tumbling over each other trying to catch up.
He is Tim Wendell. You can follow his journey at Tim_Wendell. That's Wendel. A longtime baseball historian, author, writing books about cancer in Cuba. And I guess you can't go to Cuba for you without baseball being a spice and a flavor. We were both there in 99. By the way, Tim, when we flew down in 99, the first night I got there, the Cuban World Series was in progress in the same stadium. And I did go over to watch that game, and it was awesome. I mean, the beating of the drums and all of that stuff. And I missed the Japanese World Series by a night in Tokyo when Bobby Valentine lost with Chiba Lotte back in 2007 when I went to Beijing with Cal Ripken. So I've always regretted that I didn't get to see a game in Japan because I just got there a day too late. But I don't regret having been to a Cuban World Series game. And, for that atmosphere and for what Bud Selig has tried to do with the WBC and now Rob Manfred and all the hand-wringing, the angst, the injuries, the Players Association, the agents, all of that, I'll tell you what, that tournament for being an exhibition, I mean, there were 30,000 people yelling USA, USA at Adam Jones as he took the plate on opening day. That's a whole different joint. I ain't ever seen that, Tim. Neither have you. Let's be honest.
No, and I think it's kind of the wave of the future to a large extent. I think it was good the U.S. won the WBC. I think it energized the whole situation. I find myself, it was interesting, I was thinking of the WBC just yesterday when the NHL announced they weren't going back to the Olympics. It sounds like more and more of these teams and leagues are now trying to get the Olympic moment or fever, but do it themselves, and that can be kind of risky. But I love the WBC, and I think it shows how things can change, very radically. The thing that blew me away in Cuba, Nestor, on this last trip in January, was the rise of soccer there. And it just blew my mind because you go back to, certainly some of the back and forth we've had politically with that country. One of the ways you could tell the Russians were there is suddenly there were soccer fields instead of baseball diamonds sprinkled around the countryside. And our, aerial surveillance picked that up. I guess it was Henry Kissinger at one point saying, hang on, something's up here. Cuba still plays soccer. They play baseball. Well, now they're playing much more soccer. And it's interesting to see, try to tease out why. I think one of the things that's really hurting that nation in terms of their national pastime, which they see as baseball, is almost as much as we see baseball as our national pastime. They've been playing baseball in Cuba for more than a century, too, is the guys who defect, Puig, Cespedes, Chapman. They really can't get back and play anymore. And I think some of them, I know in talking with Chapman a little bit a couple of years ago, if everything was perfect, he'd love to go back, throw a couple innings in like a winter ball, situation. He misses that climate, that fervor of a Cuban game almost as much as you do, Nestor. But right now it's not happening. And I'm fearful a little bit about baseball long-term in Cuba. Soccer is easier to pick up.
Well, the reason soccer works is the same reason it works in every incredibly poor place. You need one ball. I mean, literally, right? I mean, with baseball,
you don't need any coaching.
Tim,
you don't need any of that.
On that 99 trip, my dear friend Scott, who went with me, we had been given a whole bag. We had a whole separate thing that we shipped down in a hockey bag of gear that the Harrisburg Senators gave us. Hats, balls, stuff, giveaways, throwaway, novelty items, novelty baseballs with, Harrisburg Senators printed on them. And we took it all down there, and we got in a cab, and we told the cabbie, drive us someplace where kids are playing baseball. Didn't take long, to take us somewhere. But we went over to a big park, and we walked out of the cab as gringos with a bag full of stuff, and we had 100 children from the ages of 16 down to 4 storm us like Santa Claus. It's the most unique. I mean, I might cry telling you about it because I don't tell this story often, but it was one of those moments that if I were to write a book about the top 10 moments of my life that were completely unique, it was these impoverished children literally at our feet grabbing, and every one of them wanted a hat. I didn't know that the hats, I thought they would have wanted the balls or that they would have wanted the glove. They wanted hats, but we wanted to make sure the balls were equally distributed, that the little kids, because they were playing on 4 fields, the little kids were over here, the termites were over here, the peewees were over there, and the ponies were over there, you know what I mean? And and it was unbelievable what they used for bats, what they used for balls, balled up stockings, that we had changed their week by giving them a real baseball. And for, the kids that wanted the hats, we didn't have enough hats to go around. It was so sad to see the disappointment for the kids that didn't give the hats. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, hats are 10 cents a piece here. I should have brought 100 hats and just everybody could have had a hat, But this is 1999. I mean, that's the experience we had down in Cuba because I guess we wanted that kind of an experience. But the needs that it takes to play baseball versus soccer, it's like basketball in the inner city. There's a hoop and there's a ball. Everybody can play, right?
Very much. And I think, what you did is what I've done every trip down. I usually take a dozen baseballs and a dozen caps and hand them out. What was a little off-putting this time was I've done the same thing, hop in a cab. Okay, take me to a ballpark. I'm going to hand out stuff. We had a tough time finding game sometimes.
Oh, and really?
It was really kind of devastating.
Wow.
And some of the parks we went by, it was soccer. Or believe it or not, it was basketball. And we even went out to Hemingway's house, which I highly recommend if anybody goes down. Great time.
Are there any cats there, like in Key West, or no?
There's a couple,
okay.
But mostly not a ton. But there's a field as you kind of pull into the little town. There's a baseball field down, which he still has the sign, GG All-Stars. GG was Hemingway's youngest son, I believe, who loved baseball. And Hemingway would, and they put this field together, and Hemingway periodically would come down and pitch to both teams and made sure all the kids had equipment and balls and gloves, etc. And I was talking with somebody with the Hemingway house because at that point I still had a couple baseballs. We were getting ready to leave the next day. And I said, okay, are they playing any games down at GG All-Stars? And the woman, the tour guide, said, no, I haven't seen a game played down there in months. And he just went, oh. So it's too bad. But the world changes and away we go.
He is Tim Wendell, Tim_Wendell out on Twitter. He's authored 11 books, including Castro's Curveball, Down to the Last Pitch, Summer '68. You should go read them all if you love baseball. He's doing a book on cancer. He's also a writer in residence at Johns Hopkins and a longtime baseball writer at USA Today. I'm getting all my old baseball buddies together here, Wendell. It's like a big baseball mafia this week, and we're going to sit here and tell stories. Baby. Damn it, we're gonna keep the flame alive for the grand old game. I think. I hope. What's going on with your cancer book? Next year? Yeah?
Yep. Be out March 1st. And we've talked about that a little bit before. Dean J. Smith, Baltimore's own, who now runs Cornell Press, is coming out with it. And it was a real, there's some baseball in it. That's when I started playing some baseball. It's, pretty much as a pushback against my brother going through all this leukemia stuff. But the real kick of the book was tracking down his leukemia docs. And these are the guys who turned the tide against leukemia. Back when my
Thank God for them. My wife's in the other room. She says thank you, too, by the way.
Yeah, and they're amazing. And back when my brother was diagnosed, it was 10 to 15% survived. Now it's 90. And just one of them, just last week, and I was thinking of him because I was speaking with him, a guy named Donald Pinkle, who was briefly in the PBS Ken Burns deal. Ken Burns just blurbed the book, thank God. And but Donald Pinkle, Dr. Pinkle was they just named a research tower after him at St. Jude in Memphis, and he was the main guy who built St. Jude for Danny Thomas back in the late 60s. And so I'm amazed by these guys. They're all late 80s or 90s, and a lot of them are still working. A guy named Dr. James Holland still works 3 to 4 days a week at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And they're driven, and thank God they are, because they're, they saved a lot of lives, and the ones they couldn't quite, they prolonged it. And my brother was supposed to live 8 months. Instead, he lived 8 years, and we just had some great time.
Hey, Tim, man, appreciate the stories about your brother. I know it's not easy. And, I told the story at Camden Yards because I'm, running around the ballpark. Everybody's talking to me. My wife wasn't with me, so everybody was asking about her. And I said to somebody, I said, it's an amazing thing for guys like you and me, sitting around chasing baseball players most of our lives and doing, sports and working in the toy department. And when my wife was fighting for her life, the first thing that, occurred to me very early on after the first week when she was getting bald and, they're bringing in a drip of this and a drop of that and measuring this and trying to, keep her alive, I thought, man, these people keep people alive every day. Like, what the hell have I do with my life? What have I contributed to this planet? These nurses and doctors are coming in every day to keep her alive. What a wonderful, noble goal that is. All I was trying to do was chase girls down in Florida and figure out, how baseball worked back in the 90s, right?
Well, it's funny, too, but things do kind of cross over. When I started, the book's called The Cancer Crossings, and when I started it, I felt the same way. I said, what am I doing out of not writing sports or doing another novel? And hey, where's the baseball in this? It's few and far between, etc. And I was talking with a friend of mine who I've known forever, since college, and I said, I think I'm really out on the ledge with this new book, and he just started laughing. And he said, "No, you're not." I go, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "You're doing it again." And I said, "What am I doing again?" I have no idea. And he said, "You're writing about a select group of underdogs trying to overcome great odds. This is what you've done in almost every book." And at that point, I went, "Yeah, okay, I feel better now." It may be medicine, and all these cancer stuff as opposed to baseball or something else, but still, it's about this select group who just wouldn't give up and made the world a much, much better place.
Yeah, you write about Gonzaga, not North Carolina.
No kidding.
Hey, Tim, great having you on, man. Enjoy the baseball, and hopefully we get a beer and a dog and a game soon, man.
Oh, I'm counting on it. Thanks, Nestor.
You got it. Tim Wendell, you can find him at Tim_Wendell, longtime professor, historian, author, all that good stuff. We love having him on the program. We're doing some great stuff around here this week. If you miss any of it, you can find it in the Buy a Toyota audio vault, welcoming in baseball, welcoming it back with some great conversations. And hopefully, I'm learning a lot of stuff this week, so I know it must be good. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere in the world you go, including London, you get us and our WNST road trip to London now on sale. $100 off if you throw me an email, nasty at WNST.net. We're waiting for the rest of the NFL schedule. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.